Whispers Across the Prairie by Clara Winslow. The Montana sky stretched endlessly, hues of orange and lavender spilling across the horizon as the sun began its descent. Clara Hargrove adjusted her bonnet against the light breeze, her calloused hands gripping the reins of the wagon she guided into the bustling frontier town of Willow Creek. At 24, Clara had lived most of her life on the edges of society, her family's modest homestead a 2-day ride from the nearest trading post. But with her father's sudden passing, she was forced to leave the only home she'd ever known to sell the family's goods in town. It was a necessary step if she hoped to make ends meet for herself and her younger brother Samuel. Clara's eyes scanned the dusty streets of Willow Creek. It was livelier than she remembered. Cowboys and ranchers unloading supplies, women gathering around the mercantile, and children darting between the horses, their laughter piercing the air. But her focus wasn't on the crowd. Her thoughts were solely on securing a fair deal for her goods and returning to Samuel before nightfall. "You look lost, miss." The deep voice startled her. Turning, Clara found herself face to face with a man astride a chestnut horse. He was tall, his broad shoulders and rugged appearance speaking of a life spent outdoors. His hat was tipped low, but she could see a friendly glint in his hazel eyes. "I'm not lost," she replied, her tone clipped. "Just here to do business." The man tipped his hat. "Name's Jacob Walker. If you're here to sell, you'll want to speak with Mr. Hollis at the mercantile. He's a fair trader, but don't let him sweet-talk you into a bad deal." Clara nodded curtly, unsure whether to trust the stranger. Her father had always warned her to be wary of smooth-talking men, especially in towns like these. Still, there was something disarming about Jacob's demeanor, a quiet confidence that made her feel at ease despite her better judgment. "Thank you, Mr. Walker," she said, urging her horse forward. By late afternoon, Clara had sold most of her wares and secured a fair price for the rest. Mr. Hollis, true to Jacob's word, had been amicable but shrewd. Satisfied with her earnings, Clara loaded the wagon and prepared to head home. But as she turned onto the main road, she spotted Jacob again, leaning casually against the hitching post outside the saloon. He raised a hand in greeting, and despite herself, Clara felt a smile tug at her lips. "You're still here," she said, stopping the wagon beside him. "Figured I'd keep an eye out," he replied. "These streets can get rowdy. Didn't want you running into trouble." Clara's brow arched. "And what makes you think I can't handle myself?" Jacob chuckled, the sound rich and warm. "I've no doubt you can, Miss Hargrove. But even the toughest folks could use a little help now and then." Clara hesitated, unsure how to respond. She wasn't used to kindness from strangers, especially men. Her life had been one of hard work and self-reliance, leaving little room for frivolities like flirting or courtship. But Jacob's earnestness was hard to ignore. "Well, thank you," she said at last. "But I should be going. My brother's waiting for me." "Safe travels, Miss Hargrove," Jacob said, tipping his hat once more. Over the next few weeks, Clara's trips to Willow Creek became more frequent. Each time, she found herself crossing paths with Jacob. He seemed to appear out of nowhere, always offering a helping hand or a kind word. At first, she dismissed it as mere coincidence, but soon she began to look forward to their brief interactions. Jacob's easygoing nature and sharp wit were a welcome reprieve from her otherwise solitary life. One crisp autumn morning, Clara arrived in town to find Jacob waiting near the mercantile. "Morning, Miss Hargrove," he greeted. "You're out early today." "I wanted to beat the crowds," she replied. "There's a lot to do before winter sets in." "Let me help you then," Jacob offered, falling into step beside her. Clara glanced at him. "And why would you do that? You hardly know me." Jacob's expression softened. "Maybe I'd like to know you better." The sincerity in his voice caught her off guard. Clara had spent so long building walls around herself that she'd forgotten what it felt like to let someone in. But as she looked into Jacob's eyes, she saw no ulterior motives, only genuine kindness. "All right," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But don't think I'll go easy on you." Over the following months, Clara and Jacob's friendship deepened. He began visiting the homestead, helping with repairs and bringing small gifts for Samuel, who adored him. Clara found herself laughing more, the weight of her responsibilities feeling just a bit lighter with Jacob around. She learned about his past, a former ranch hand who'd struck out on his own, looking for a place to call home. He'd lost his family to illness years ago, a pain Clara understood all too well. One chilly evening, as they sat on the porch watching the stars, Jacob turned to her. "Clara, I know life's been hard for you," he began. "And I know you're used to doing everything on your own. But I want to be here for you, for Samuel. If you'll have me." Clara's heart swelled at his words. She'd spent so long guarding herself against the world, afraid to show vulnerability. But Jacob had seen past her defenses, showing her that she didn't have to face life's challenges alone. "I'd like that," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. Their courtship blossomed, and soon the town was abuzz with talk of their impending union. Jacob's steadfast support allowed Clara to focus on expanding the homestead, turning it into a thriving farm that could sustain them through the harsh winters. Together, they built a life filled with love, laughter, and hope for the future. On a warm spring day, under the shade of a blooming oak tree, Jacob and Clara exchanged vows in front of a small gathering of friends and neighbors. Samuel stood proudly by his sister's side, beaming with joy. As Clara looked into Jacob's eyes, she felt a sense of peace she'd never known before. She was no longer just a survivor, she was part of something greater, a partnership built on trust, respect, and love. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the prairie, Clara and Jacob shared their first dance as husband and wife. The world around them faded away, leaving only the rhythm of their hearts beating in unison. And for the first time in a long time, Clara allowed herself to dream of a brighter tomorrow.